Hello everybody, Travis here from Tpull's Corner. Thanks for joining me. You are joining me on the eve of the set rotation. We had a delayed rotation for a year. We're losing 4 sets. This is the third video in the third set of the 4. I'll cover all 4 in different videos. This is the list of cards that I'm going to miss the most from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. And we start just going through the Wooburg color pie. And where are we going to stop first? We're going to stop first, should be no surprise for long-time viewers, alternate win scenario, Cloudsteel Kirin. Cost 3, you get a 3/2 flyer, you can reconfigure it for 5 mana and equip it onto another creature. The equipped creature gains flying, and you can't lose the game, and your opponent can't win the game. It took me a long time to get a second copy of this, so I held off making decks for a long time. I ended up making a blue-white deck that had hexproof creatures, and then you would put Cloudsteel Kirin on the hexproof creature, you'd have a little bit of blue counterspell to prevent against board wipes, and presto changeo, your opponent couldn't do anything. I mean, I had opponents sit there and hang in there and hit me time and time again, and I'd lose 1,000 life points or 2,000 life points, and I would still end up getting them at the end. There are other people, as soon as I configured the card onto a creature, they would insta-scoop because they weren't having none of that, because I was putting it on a hexproof creature. There are some that tried to find ways to get rid of the creature, but I had built into the deck so many ways to protect the creature or to put it back on a different creature before they could kill me if I didn't have negative health. They were not prepared for this card. It was surprisingly easy to win with this deck. I got scared at the idea of what other decks I could make that had this card in it, just because it was so effective. It was so devastating. Such a fun alternate way to win the game. It had to be frustrating to be on the opposite end of it. Almost never, maybe once or twice in the last couple of years, where I've been on the wrong end of that. Very seldom used card, but I think a very underestimated card. So I was already thinking of using this again, but rotation crept up on me a little bit too quickly. And yeah, I'm going to miss this card. That deck I never got rid of. It stayed in my deck list. And whenever I'm having a tough day, I bring out that deck and I start winning. It was just, this is enough. This is a lovely alternate win scenario. You can build more than one deck around it. It's just a lot of fun. All right, the next one, Farewell to Wandering Emperor. That's kind of honorable mention. I know a lot of people are ready for that one to go. A lot of people are ready for this one to go too, Farewell. I'm not, because I only ever had one card of it. One copy, and it joined with the other board wipes that I liked for white, right? So we would use from the Innistrad decks. I would usually have a copy of Vanquish the Horde, I'd have 2 copies of Via Invitation only, and then I'd have 1 copy of Farewell. And this was the great equalizer for me. If it ever felt like the opponent was overpowering me, and it just seemed unfair, this was the great equalizer to wipe everything and say, okay, let's start over and let's try this again. I think control decks that had multiple copies of this could be very frustrating to play against. A lot of times, even though I only had 1 copy, as soon as I played the 1 copy, people would scoop. But you know what? It was very handy. I always appreciated when I was having white in my deck, and I was suspicious of what the meta would throw against my creative decks, because sometimes I would not pay attention to the meta, just because I'm examining all these cards that we have. I'm trying to use every Magic card that they create. Even if it was designed for limited, I'm still trying to figure out a way to make it useful in a constructed deck. So a lot of my decks are just creative exercises. So sometimes Farewell would be kind of needed to counter the prevalent strategy that we were facing. So yeah, this was a very useful card for me to come in clutch situations. I don't think there's anything quite like it out there that's going to replace it. So we say farewell to Farewell. I am going to miss that card. Let's move on to blue. And one of the cards I'm going to miss is Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom. To some extent, I'm going to miss the shrines as a whole. There's a whole cycle of shrine cards, 1 for each color, and I'm a sucker for the shrine cards. They've done shrine cycles a couple of different times, and I've loved all of them, especially if you put 1 each of these in a Brawl deck in Historic. They're awesome. So, but I also am a big fond of milling strategies. So I had a deck with Mirror Box where I could have multiples of these out, and I had a deck with only the Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom and a mill strategy, and it didn't win a lot, but it won often enough that it was fun, and so I kept that around. So I think out of all of the Shrine cards, this is the only one that mills, so it's got a special place in my heart, but sort of honorary mention to all of the Go-Shintai legendary enchantment shrines in this particular set. Really gonna miss that. I made not just a enchantment creature shrine deck, but I also made a Joda deck using the enchantment shrines, and that one was fun too. So every time that I put these shrines in a deck, it's just plain fun. That's all there is to it. Okay, next, Reality Chip. Again, a lot of these cards might be rare, mythic rare, and I only have 1 or 2 copies of them. That may be why they're my favorites and why I'll miss them when they're gone, because I didn't overuse them. I didn't, to some extent, I'm still like, I didn't get to play with this card enough. This card, I like the cards where they allow you to look at the top card of your library at any time. So we did this with, what was it, going back to Midnight Hunt, Augur of Autumn. That was another card that you could see the top card of your library at any time. So if you have one of those in your expansion sets, it's probably going to be one of my favorites. But the cool thing is you could reconfigure this for 3, put it on another creature, and then suddenly you can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, which is another favorite tactic of me. So combining both of these features, it's kind of like as soon as Wizards designs a card where you can play and cast spells from the top of your library, they need to give you a way to see what you're doing rather than blind cast. So the top feature sort of has to be there in order for you to do the other thing. But actually, I just like the extra information of being able to look at the top card of my library. I like that better. And the bottom part is just the bonus for me. So, but this card was so heavily feared, it was a big target for removal. As soon as it would appear, oh, this got killed so many times. That's also another reason why I'm going to miss it, because I didn't get a chance to reconfigure it and use it that often. If you did, you could run away with the game, right? So it was just too easy to start winning that way. So yeah, gonna miss that because I felt like I didn't get to play with that one often enough. Let's see. Next, there's one more card in blue out of all of these that I probably like the best. Let's go to Jin-Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant. I ended up, actually, I didn't craft any of these. I ended up with 3 copies. And whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, you copy the spell. You can choose new targets for the copy. I like being able to copy things. His bottom ability was awesome. When an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability only triggers once each turn. But, yeah, there's so many people that would forget, including me. We would forget that this worked against artifacts. We would remember the instants and sorceries, but then we'd go to cast an artifact and it's like, oh yeah, that's going to fizzle because Jin-Gitaxias is out on the field on my opponent's side. I had a lot of fun. Sometimes it was an instant scoop if the opponent played this, but a lot of my decks had multiple instant removal cards, so I could sort of save up for a turn or two, and the opponent would think they had me, and I would actually get rid of Jin-Gitaxias. I was always really thrilled to be able to do so. But usually when the shoe was on the other foot, they were mostly not able to get rid of this thing when I had it. So I really enjoyed the cancellation kind of thing where suddenly you can't do those type of things. And a lot of times the opponent would get mixed up and forget, or they'd be down to 1 card and they draw it and they cast it, and it's like, no, you need to save up for two of those type of spells if you want one to be effective. And you might have had a chance, but you didn't do it right. So a good card that kind of causes confusion in the enemy, and I ended up putting this in a number of decks, and always a fun time if you can get that out on the field. I'm going to miss that card. I'm going to miss the Phyrexian Praetor. Who'd have thought I ever would have said that? Moving on to the black cards, there's one in particular that I ended up using a lot. This ended up becoming a very utility card for me, March of Wretched Sorrow. The March instant cards is a cycle within the Neon Dynasty expansion set. They're all kind of cool, but this one, very useful for me when I'm doing mono black and I need a source of life gain, which in the meta environment often you really did need. So it's not unusual as a removal card for me to pack 4 of these in the deck. I don't know that there's an immediate replacement for it in terms of acting as both removal, and life gain. It was especially because it was an X card. I really had fun with this in certain decks where you could reduce the cost of your X spells. This was a real key player in those decks. So once we had the ability with a certain artifact that's not from Neon Dynasty, so it shall remain nameless for now, but that every turn that passed, your spells got one cheaper. Oh, that was great with March of Wretched Sorrow. That was just key. That was clutch. So, yeah, I'm going to miss this card, generally. Out of all of the black cards in Neon Dynasty, I'm actually going to miss this one the most. Probably, I like the artwork, but it's not my favorite artwork, so I was kind of surprised when I'm going through the list, and I'm like, yep, that's actually the card I will miss the most. This card, of course, has been banned, Invoke Despair. So, yeah, that was definitely an overpowered card. Everybody burned their wild cards to get it. I did not at the time. I had a self-imposed moratorium where I would not use my wild cards at all for a few years. And so it took me forever to build up the number of copies. So everybody else got to have a lot more fun with this against me than I got to use it. So I think a lot of people really had a favorite card here for Invoke Despair. And a lot of people were happy to see it go away. Moving on to red, a lot of people think Kamano faces Kakazan, it was overpowered, and they're going to be really happy. That's one of the cards they'll be probably the happiest to see go, just because they've gone against it so many times. It's probably been overused as far as they're concerned. But out of the cards that I like, that I'm going to miss myself, I only ever had one copy of it, Atsushi, the Blazing Sky. This is a cycle of cards, a cycle of legendary dragon spirits that are in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I like all of those dragons. This, I think, is my favorite. The options are great. You could exile the top 2 cards of your library if it dies and play those cards, or you create 3 treasure tokens. Depending on what state my board was in, some decks I had specifically constructed that I was planning to have this thing appear and die in the same turn. I was counting on my opponent to kill it so I could get those 3 treasure tokens. Other times, it's like, hey, I'm in a state, I got plenty of land, I just want to exile the top 2 cards of my library. You're going to get rid of my card? I'm going to put out something just as bad or even worse. So, yeah, I only ever had the one card. If I was playing red, it would probably go in the deck. So I don't feel it was ever overused, having one copy of the card in the deck. Yeah, I'm going to miss Atsushi. I think out of all the dragons in Neon Dynasty, I'm going to miss Atsushi. A card that I didn't expect to enjoy quite so much, and again, Mythic Rare only ever had one copy of it, Explosive Singularity. Once I got Hidetsugu and Carry, which is in a later expansion, I would always include this card in my Hidetsugu and Carry decks, and I lost track of how many decks did I make with Hidetsugu and Carry at 4, 5, 6? And this is one of the ones where you really learn to spot how Arena treated you and how it learned to adapt. Because this card was the most expensive card in every deck that I had it in, and I would always get it in the opening hand. Or it would be the very first card I would draw, one or the other. And when I got Hidetsugu and Carry, this was part of the one-turn kill combo, where they kill Hidetsugu and Carry, you position this as the top card on the deck, it does 10 points of damage to the opponent, and then you get to cast it for free and deal 10 more points of damage to the opponent. So, the very first time I constructed that deck, I won like 4 or 5 matches in a row, and then Arena woke up and said, oh, you know what? I'm not going to give you that expensive card anymore. So suddenly Explosive Singularity stopped appearing in my opening hand. It was just an interesting coincidence, and an interesting way that shows you that when you start winning too much, Arena actually tampers with your card draw, where it has a set algorithm that it's default, it treats you a certain way whenever you make a new deck. And if it doesn't work and you have a successful deck, it's not that they'll just necessarily land starve you or land flood you, although they'll do that to you on occasion, but they literally change the cards that their default algorithm deals you from the deck, because it realizes, oh, somehow this combination of cards they got, this is a good combination for them, they're winning too often with it, so we're going to mix things up on them. That's how their algorithms are configured. So they tamper with you if you win too much, and they're going to alter your card draw. This was the card that helped me to understand what the was happening behind the scenes with their artificial intelligence. And it's either that or they got live employees. As I always say, there's a live team of Wizards employees that looks at my play and they sabotage me. They'll put cards in my opponent's deck my opponent didn't even have in their deck just to beat me. if I start winning too much. But yeah, this ended up being just a really cool way to do a one-turn kill. And even though I would only have one copy, eventually the game would last long enough that I would get it. And yeah, I won a lot of matches with this card. And now it's going away. It's a very expensive card. It's a very powerful card. I'm going to miss it. Moving on to green. This card I will not miss. Atsusi's Many Journeys. My opponents hit on this card so many times, I started including it in my green decks, and I whiffed like 60-70% of the time I'd whiff on this card. There are times when I would have an extra number of lands in the deck and Atsusi's Many Journeys, and I would still miss on this card. It was the bane of my existence, and I did have a Cultivator Colossus deck that was very successful, that I think I had 4 copies of this in the deck, and I started hitting it more often just because I had so much land in there, it was almost impossible not to. But even with that, I would still miss this sometimes, and my opponent would play it opposite me, and they would hit. It's very frustrating. I'm not going to miss that card. That card is cursed against me. It can go away. A card I only ever had 1 copy of, Shigeki, Jukai Visionary. This is the card I'm going to miss out of green, out of this particular expansion set. 1/3, you could return it to your hand, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Everything else goes into your graveyard. Then, later, for XX green, you could discard Shigeki, so for 4 mana, you could get 1 target non-legendary card from your graveyard to your hand. If you had 6 mana, you could get 2 cards, non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. So you couldn't get Shigeki back with this if you had multiple copies of Shigeki, but you could get other cards back. And of course, sometimes those would be cards that, because you needed to hit your land drop, you would do this, you would get your land drop, you would then throw the rest of the cards into your graveyard, and you're like, oh, those are some good cards. I'll go back and get those later. This made for some very fun combinations. Never had as much chance, because I only had the 1 copy, to play with this card as much as I wanted to. Very useful card. So I'm going to miss it. If there was a choice to say, hey, we're going to have rotation, but we're going to vote, and you can keep a card, 1 card from each color, I would be up for that. Say, if Wizards wanted to do an interesting experiment and say, we understand it's rotation, we delayed it for a year already, but if you could keep your favorite cards for another year, would you do it? Oh, I would vote for Shigeki in a heartbeat. I would keep that card. Let's move on to the multicolored cards. I will not miss Oni Cult Anvil. That was the most slow. There was maybe 1 or 2 opponents that knew what they were doing and would go fast, and I was impressed with their skill with handling this card. Everybody else was slow as molasses. I hated how slow it was to wait for my turn to roll around playing against that card. I did think I did lose more often than I won before I got a handle on how to deal with it, but it wasn't losing quite so much. It was losing at such a slow pace that was disgusting. Here's a card I'm going to miss, the Kamigawa. Every time I would go to 5 colors, I'm throwing this card in there, especially since I had 2 copies of it. Enchantment Saga. For the first one, you exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls. That's just an awesome ability right there. Then you can return up to 1 other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then an opponent discards a card. Because Wizards has gotten so heavy into tokens over the last few years, odds are my opponent had a nice little token on the field. Especially if you have like the Bosijo Enchantment Saga and those kind of tokens, you could just bounce those tokens, throw it back into your opponent's hand. Well, maybe not that one, because I think that throws the Enchantment Saga up in your hand. But other tokens, you could just bounce them. The opponent doesn't actually get anything added to their hand, but maybe they only had 1 or 2 cards left. They still have to discard a card. And then for the third, you get this Enchantment Dragon Spirit, Okagachi Made Manifest to the right, 6/6 with flying and trample. And whenever it made manifest attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard, you get to return it to your hand, plus Okagachi Made Manifest gets plus X to its power until end of turn, where X is the mana value of that card. So if you had a 3 mana value card and that was like the least expensive in your graveyard, the opponent would choose that one, it comes back up in your hand. Suddenly instead of 6/6 trample, it's 9/6 trample. This was an awesome Enchantment Saga. This is like probably my favorite Enchantment Saga out of the entire set. And that's saying something, right? There were some really fun Enchantment Sagas in this deck. So I would say if I was making a top 10 list of favorite Enchantment Sagas, this would definitely go on the top 10 list of all time. Yeah, whenever I'd have 5 colors, this was going in the deck. It was just too fun. It was too fun. Even though it was expensive, If I could get it out, you know what? I'm throwing it in the deck. I'm going to miss it. Okay, a card that I wouldn't have thought that I was going to miss. Containment Construct. I chose to examine this card a while back. It was so good that I created an entire series about it. There's a playlist on Containment Construct. If you haven't seen it, it's one I would recommend. When you discard a card, you can exile it from your graveyard, and if you do, you can play that card this turn. So I could discard a land. If I hadn't played my land that turn, I could play that land even though I discarded the card. So it's a way to eke out extra value from self-discard decks. There are a number of other cards that Wizard has in this set and others where you're discarding cards, and there's a way to salvage them. Instead of just discarding the card as it is to achieve whatever effect you're trying to do, you could actually get that spell back and use it if you had enough mana. You couldn't, if it was your opponent's turn, if you had to discard a land, you couldn't play it on your opponent's turn. So there were some limitations. But I ended up dragging this card out of mothballs to put it in another deck more recently. It worked just like a wonder. And there are more expansions lately. Wizards has gotten more and more involved with using the graveyard as a resource and really making it like just a rotating door between the battlefield and the graveyard, quite frankly. So the graveyard is as big a threat as ever. And I was actually looking to make some more decks with this in it. It turns out I really appreciate this card. I love the artwork on it. I love the mechanic that they designed around this, so the ability, and I didn't see many people ever using it. I maybe only came up against it once or twice. I made a lot of decks out of this. I used every single color. I used it in multicolor decks. It was awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna miss this card. This may be one of the ones that maybe I'm alone on. Let me know if you all played with this card at the end and ended up are going to miss it or not, because I never hear anyone talking about this card. I ended up growing to love that card. Goodbye to Reckoner Bankbuster was already banned. I didn't really think they needed to, but you know, that's a story for another day, I guess. And let's see, there's one final card. And I think this is going to make like a total top 12 list, right? I did 12 for my top 12 list for Midnight Hunt, and then I just did a top 10 for Crimson Vow, I think, if I remember right recently. And then for this one, I ended up with 12 cards. And the final card is Mirror Box. I'm a sucker for legendary cards, but legendary, if you have 4 copies in your deck, maybe you want another card in your hand as a backup in case the first one gets removed, but a lot of times you end up with some dead cards in your hand, because if you stick the second legendary card down, you have to choose one. You have to lose the first one or lose the second one. Here, the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. So each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1. Each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. This was great in Joda decks. If I got out 2 Jodas and a Mirror Box at the same time, that was awesome. If I got out a couple of Jin-Gitaxias at the same time, that was awesome. If I get out a couple of Helena and Helenas, on and on and on. There's all sorts of fun effects you can do when suddenly the legend rule doesn't apply anymore. I'm already a lover of legendary cards. The idea that I can get rid of the one drawback that legendary cards have and turn it into an advantage, I am there. I use this card a lot. I don't know what I'm going to do now that it's going to go away. This is another one where if you're going to vote, if you had a vote on all the artifacts that we were going to lose out of like all 4 expansion sets, I might vote for Mirror Box to hang around. Like, this should be reprinted or something. It should be in a core set or something. I don't know. I want this card back. But again, it's one of those things where I'll probably use it in Historic all the time anyway. So maybe I won't miss it as much because I'll still be using it. But that is my list of top 12 cards that I'm going to miss the most from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So that's the third expansion set. We're going to lose 4 expansion sets. I'll do another release soon. I'm just going to time release this, I think, and we'll try and get them all done in a hop, skip, and a jump. But as always, we invite you to add a comment, like, and subscribe. If there's a card in here that you're really going to miss and I didn't mention it, go ahead and let me know. Let me know your case for what your favorite card is and why maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe there's a card in here that you hated out of all the ones that I mentioned. Maybe you just absolutely despise Farewell, and there's another card that really should take its place on the list. Let me know. And but as always, we'll have something new for you next time. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.